Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. If people go ahead and come in, they'll have to, I guess, have come in a little bit late. So my name is Tyler. I'm an instructional designer here at UNC. And I'm also here with Kendra. She's going to be our moderator. She is my faithful companion. And we also have Madeline, which is going to be interpreting for us today. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. Okay. So I always like to review the basic objectives before we go through, and this is a best practice and really in asynchronous and synchronous education. So that way your students know what to expect from the day and what skills or knowledge points they should have by the end. So by the end of the day today, you should be able to create and upload a Panopto video, identify some of the best practices for video creation, and you should also be able to embed a Panopto video into a Canvas page. And just so you know, if everybody wouldn't mind muting themselves during this time, I am going to be recording this. So I'm going to go all the way through the presentation, and then we're going to have a lot of time for questions after the presentation. So yeah, and if you have any questions and you're worried you'll forget, please feel free to type them in the chat, and Kendra will make sure that those questions are answered. Thank you. Okay, so the very first thing that we want to do is learn how to find Panopto inside of Canvas, and also where to go to get that created. So the first thing we're going to do is, if you don't have Panopto activated in your account, you can come down here to Settings. You can go to Navigation, and I already have Panopto kind of already set up here, but I can bring this down just as an example. So if you don't have it in your course menu, you can come down into Canvas, go ahead and drag this. I personally like to drag it, and I like to drag it to a place of prominence, so that way my students know where I'm going to be putting it or where they can find some videos. And then from there you can hit save, and you'll notice that it went ahead and popped up to the top. So as soon as it's there, you have officially activated Panopto inside of Canvas. Now, as soon as you click Panopto, you will be brought to this screen. And this is kind of the home screen for your course. Here, if I had any videos created for the course, I would find them underneath the right here where it says this folder contains no videos. I can change folders by clicking up here. I can even make little subdivided folders by clicking add folder with inside of a folder, so we can maintain nice and organized. And it's something that I absolutely recommend as you go through Panopto and as you start to make videos and store them. Eventually you'll get a lot of videos. You're going to want to know when and where to find them. Okay, so if you have two options on what you can do, if you already have an MP4 file of a lecture that you've done or a PowerPoint that you've recorded over, you can go ahead and upload that content here, and you'll get this screen. All you got to do is you can either click here or you can drag your file into this box. And from there, you'll go through the upload process. And you guys will see a little bit of what that looks like later, so I won't go through it all right now. But the most important probably button here is creating Panopto. And I like to take a few moments here to let you know that there is actually two versions of Panopto, and they do look different. They have the same capabilities, but there's a version for Mac and there is a version for your PC. Now I'm on a Mac here, so I can naturally show you the Mac, but all that changes for it is that it'll say Panopto for PC here. Now, if I go ahead and click this, I am going to be brought to this screen. Now, I have already downloaded Panopto on this computer, so I can go directly to Open Panopto and it'll work for me. If you are clicking on this button and it's not working for you, it's most likely because you haven't downloaded Panopto yet. So you can come down to this button, go ahead and click download, and it'll take just a few moments as you go through the download process. but it is relatively quick. And once you do it once, you shouldn't have to do it again unless you're changing computers or something like that. Now, from here, I would click Open Panopto, but I am going to quickly switch screens. And for the purposes that I can show you both the Mac and the PC view. So the very first one that I like to show is the Mac. I personally think the Mac screen looks a little bit easier. It has a little bit fewer options than the PC version, but they're relatively both the same and they have the same capabilities roughly. So in the upper left-hand corner, the first thing that you're going to see is record and pause. As soon as you're ready to create your Panopto video, you can go ahead and click record. That button will then change to a stop and pause button. So if you ever want to stop, you can just click that. The one thing that I do like to point out here is that the video does not actually, what Panopto actually does is it pauses the video when you click stop. And this is something that I like to point out because if you are, you're in office hours and you want to record a video and then all of a sudden a student comes in, and whether they want to talk about a personal topic or if they want to just talk to you for a while. The one thing that you should know is that your Panopto is recording. So you want to make sure that if you're going to do a Panopto video or recording, you do want to do it in a time and space where you have an appropriate amount of time to get that done without interruption. The next area you'll see highlighted in the red square here is the folder that you would like to place everything in. Now, I personally like and recommend to place everything in my folder, which is a folder that we have that everybody has with their Panopto files. The other thing you can do, which is easier, especially if you're just starting, is that you can go ahead and record it to your course, which is default term Panopto. For this one, it says tips and tricks, but if I was doing it for this course, it would say Panopto Basics. And the reason I recommend doing that is because it's easily transferable. If you'd like to copy or import this course at a later time, this video will follow you and all the permissions to your students will follow. So that was an excellent update that happened about a year ago in August. So the next little area is called session. And this is one of the big differences in Macs, and I'll show you later because they actually call it name in the PC version. But for session, this is actually the name of your video. And it actually, when it defaults to the worst possible name ever. So you want to make sure to change it. And when you go through, as you can see in this video, it says Wednesday, December 20th, 2020 at 9:42 a.m. It doesn't give you any topic for your video. It doesn't tell you when you created it. It's a really bad name. So what I recommend doing is coming up with a unique name for your lecture. And then I also recommend saying something along the lines of spring 2021 or fall 2020. So that way you know when you created it. And that way, if you need to update it at a later time, you can do so, which is really kind of a nice process. As we continue down the screen, I'm going to go to the big white box here. It's called primary source. Now, the primary source is going to be your face. So you have a couple options here that you can choose from. Now, you can choose the video. So right now I have it as clicked off as none. But if I were to come in here, I could go ahead and change that. And I could click my camera and it would go ahead and pop up with my face on the camera, just as you see in Zoom now. I would also see the audio. So if you have more than one microphone, you're going to want to be able to select the microphone that you want. So you can go ahead and select that audio there. In the giant green square, this is your secondary source. Now, I always like to say the secondary source should be your content. So if you have a PowerPoint, if you are just recording your screen because you're demonstrating a software or anything like that, I highly recommend going through here and selecting your source and putting your content in that secondary screen. And for the Mac, you do have two screens that are possible. So you can have two sources, and you can actually switch between those two sources and it will still record, which is really cool. So you could have, for example, that secondary source one could be your PowerPoint. And let's say that you're teaching a science lab, and you could also have a lab camera connected to your computer where you can go and walk over to demonstrate your lab experiment or anything like that. So it does get a little bit more advanced there, and it's a little bit more complicated, but it does have those capabilities for when you're ready to advance to that level. In the lower left-hand corner, you're going to see a square highlighted in purple. And for this is where you can actually record your PowerPoint or your keynote slides, which is fantastic. And this is one of my favorite features in Panopto, is that it actually creates a nice little table of contents. If you click that button, your video automatically gets a table of contents that your students can access, and they can kind of skip around the video. Of course, we always encourage students to watch the video all the way through the first time. But what I like about the table of contents is that it really gives students an advantage when they want to say, oh, I forgot that one piece of information. They can quickly jump to that slide. So it's an excellent resource that your students can use, and they don't have to go through the entire video to find that one segment. Something that's just really handy and very valuable to your students. So this is the basic Panopto screen. Now I forgot to mention this in the beginning. I have invited you all to this course. If you accept the course in Canvas, you will have access to all this information. I will not delete this course. So you'll have it for as long as you want to have it. So kind of nice to kind of come in here, and like I said, you'll have all this information. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you do have two different screens if you're using a PC or a Mac. This is the PC screen, and it does look a little bit different, but it does have a lot of the basic features. Now, because I just went over them, I'm not going to hit every feature. Here, I'll just point out a few differences. You do see the record button. It does not have a pause button. So when you click that, that's when you'll get your recording, and you'll be able to pause there as well. So once again, you have the folder you can select. And one of the major changes is that instead of session, it says name now, which is really important. Once again, you have your primary source, which is your audio and your video. You are able to record PowerPoints. The major difference that PC has is that you can actually have multiple screens and multiple sources recording. So you can have the more you have, that's great. Just remember that it does get exponentially more complicated the more screens you have. So if that's something that you are wanting to do, I would highly recommend experimenting with a few videos first, and watching those videos. So that way you know how and when to switch your screens, and if they're all being recorded, and if the sound is coming through on everything. So just kind of some tips and tricks there. But these are the basic Panopto screens. Now, as soon as you hit record, you will be brought to a recording screen, and you'll be able to just speak and move through this process. Now, I will say there is a little bit of a trust value there, because Panopto goes into the background so that it doesn't interfere with your presentation. It is recording, it is doing its thing, but like I said, it goes in the background. It can be a little bit scary because you don't know if it is or not. There's a little bit of a trust value there. And as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't jump into this cold and do a big presentation right off the bat. Always check your technology, make sure that it's working. I personally always do a test video just to make sure that my content is getting recorded, because there's nothing worse than going through a lecture and then going back and be like, oh no, my sound wasn't working. Then you have to do it again. It's the worst feeling in the world. I've seen it happen a few times. I've done it myself. Hopefully I can save you some pain as you go through that process. But here are some quick best practices for recording, and these are relatively basic, but can make your videos instantly better. especially when we talk about student engagement and being able to watch your clips and actually get the content from it. So the very first one is one recording per concept. So we typically recommend that your recordings are 15 minutes or less. So you don't want to do a really long recording and then upload that. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, I'll touch on first, is an equity issue. Very large videos have a hard time, if you're allowing your students to download, they have a harder time doing so. And if they're streaming, it might take a little bit more bandwidth to actually go through that. So that's one thing that we do recommend to kind of help students who may have a slow internet connection, just to kind of go through that process and make it a little bit easier for themselves. It's also better for student engagement. If you're teaching an asynchronous webinar, or sorry, an asynchronous course that's online, a lot of studies have shown that the longer your video is, the less students actually retain from that video because they get distracted. So we always, as I said earlier, we always kind of recommend 15 minutes or less. And this is a really great way if you're a teacher. I know when I was a history teacher, so I'd have several topics that I wanted to hit when I got into my lecture. I highly recommend just breaking down one concept at a time, having a little video. You can even put it onto different pages inside of your module to kind of break it up and have your videos kind of ready that way for your students. Another thing is to choose an outline over a script. When you have a script, you sound very scripted. We've all kind of seen it, you know, where you look at a president, for example, they're giving a speech and then they get criticized because they sounded like they were just talking to a computer. We want to try to avoid that. So one of the best things that you can do is provide an outline for yourself, hit your points. And then what this does is it brings you out as a professor. So it increases student engagement because your students feel that you're being more real. And it also kind of loosens you up as well, makes your video a little bit less rigid, and kind of brings in some of that flavor. So not a bad way to go. The other thing that you want to do is to look into the camera. And this is really tough, and it actually takes some time to kind of, get it. But if you can look into your camera, if you're on a Mac, there's usually a giant green light that's staring at you. And you'll be able to see it. And for PCs, there's usually a green light as well. But I always recommend kind of staring at the light. And that'll actually kind of help you as you go through it. It helps create that nice eye contact that you want with your students. And it does take time. If you're not perfect right away, that's okay. In fact, it actually makes you and some of your content sometimes even better because it comes off as real. So that's okay. If you don't get the absolute perfect recording, that's okay. If you mess up really bad, there is some editing software that you can go through and do. But yeah, I just encourage you to go with it and kind of practice. If you do have anything in your background, I always try to check my background to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate or that you don't want students to see. If you're sharing your screen, I also recommend going through and actually making sure that your desktop is clear. I've heard some horror stories of like of teachers leaving their calendar up and they've had like sensitive doctor's appointments or inappropriate stuff that you just don't want to send out into the student population. So I always try to make sure that you close out all your tabs, that your desktop doesn't have any saved files that you don't want the world to see. That way, if you do accidentally share your screen or anything like that, you're okay. And recommend that for Zoom too. So we'll add in some little Zoom tips and tricks in here. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to go through this presentation, and I'll open up for questions at the end of this, but I'm going to quickly talk about how to embed a video, and then I'll go through a demonstration. And then after that, we're going to have a Q&A where I can feel free to answer any of your questions, proceed through any demonstrations that you guys would like, and really just review some of these topics. So once you have your video recorded, you're going to come in here into the embedding your Panopto or I should say, you're going to come to your page. And on this page, you're going to click edit, and you will be brought to this screen here. Now on this screen, it has changed recently. So if you haven't seen this yet, that's why it kind of looks a little bit different. But you click on this plug, and we have highlighted Panopto there. Now you will also see in this browser, and unfortunately this picture is a little bit old, that you'll actually see that we put Panopto up here at UNC. So that way you can easily access it. So if you come in here, you might have to search for it before it comes up here, but it should just come up and you should be okay. What you're going to do is click that and go ahead and click that button there, and you will be brought to this screen. And as I mentioned earlier, I will demonstrate this for you. But you'll be brought to this screen. You can select your video that you want, and you'll be able to click insert. So let's quickly, I'm going to go to the next page, and I'm going to demonstrate this process for you. But I'm going to go ahead and click edit. I will be brought here. And as I mentioned earlier, at UNC, we have unplugged this, so that way faculty have a better chance to access it, and it's just easier. But if you're at another institution or you want to do here, you can come here, you can click view all, and you can go ahead and search for Panopto, and it'll come up here. Now, since I already have it here, I'm going to go ahead and click. And it will bring you to this screen. Now, what's nice here is that you can choose to upload a video if you like as well from this screen. So if you have recorded a Zoom meeting that you have, or like I said, you currently have an MP4 that you've already created, you can upload that. And if you've created a video, you can come to this choose option. Now, I don't have any videos in this course because I like to store everything in my folder. And this is because I find it just easier to have my general areas. But I also have another folder that I personally created that is within my folder called training videos. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to grab my 5 jokes and riddles presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and click insert. Now, you do have some options here. If you want to change some of these, you want the aspect ratios, the width, the height. So you have some options here. In general, I recommend just kind of leaving it as it is. These are excellent HD quality settings. So unless you kind of know what you're doing, this is, I wouldn't mess with this at all. But I'll go ahead and I'll click insert. And, this is a good thing that I should show you. It's going to insert where you have your cursor. So in that situation, my cursor is up here. I'm going to go ahead and bring this down here. I'll quickly go through this process just one more time. All right, that looks a lot better. But I'll go ahead and I'll click save here. And this is what your page will look like. You have this really nice embedded video. All your students have to do is hit play. So it's really kind of fantastic, very easy for them. And if they click on this up arrow here, you'll be able to see that table of contents that I brought up earlier. So they can come in through here. They can say they watched everything up to quiz 3. And so I can bring that, and they can click here and they can resume the video from the very start. So a very cool thing that I like to point out that is helpful for students. Okay, and that is the end of the content portion of our presentation. And I'll quickly just review some of the goals. By now you should be able to create and upload a Panopto video. You should identify some of the best practices for video creation, and you should know how to embed a video. If you don't, that's okay. We can answer some questions after this. You can also contact my team, myself. You can please feel free to email me. If you're having technical issues, please feel free to bring in a ticket into our ticketing system. You can do that at help.unco.edu. But other than that, I will take some time now to go ahead and answer some questions.